The question isn't why she stopped eating. It's why she stayed. Chicago, January 7th. The kind of cold that doesn't just nip, it bites deep, stealing breath and turning the city into a landscape of skeletal trees and grimy, ice-crusted snow piled like dirty meringues against the curb. Inside the third-floor apartment on West Gray Street, the radiator hissed and clanked, a valiant but losing battle against the frost-etching intricate, fragile forests on the inside of the single-pane windows. The air smelled faintly of dust, old wood, and the ghost of last night's attempt at stir-fry that had ended in charred regret. Maya stood at the kitchen sink, her reflection ghostly in the dark window. 32, but the lines around her eyes felt deeper lately, etched by something heavier than time. She rinsed a coffee mug, the chipped rim catching on her thumb. The silence of the apartment pressed in, thick and expectant, broken only by the radiator's rhythmic complaint and the distant wail of a siren slicing through the frozen air. It had been like this since August. Since the phone call. Since the world tilted on its axis and dumped her into this strange, hollowed-out version of her life. She dried her hands on a faded dish towel, the action automatic, meaningless. Her gaze drifted across the small living room, past the unpacked boxes still huddled apologetically in the corner, remnants of her rushed move from the suburbs after. Her eyes landed, inevitably, on the photograph on the bookshelf. Then, grinning that impossible, lopsided grin, forever 28, forever frozen mid-laugh on that camping trip up in Door County. The ache was a physical thing, a stone lodged beneath her ribs. Grief wasn't a wave anymore. It was the undertow, constant, pulling, making every step feel like wading through wet cement. A soft sound broke the silence. Not a meow, not a purr. More like a sigh. A shifting of weight on worn carpet. Maya turned. In the doorway to the living room, haloed by the weak afternoon light struggling through the frost-fringed window, sat Clara. She wasn't Maya's cat. Not really. She was the apartment's cat. A fixture, like the stubbornly sticky kitchen drawer or the faint smell of cabbage that sometimes lingered in the hallway. The previous tenant, Mrs. Gable, a sweet, bird-like woman who'd moved into assisted living, had tearfully explained that Clara, at 15, was too old, too set in her ways, too particular to be uprooted. "She'll stay," Mrs. Gable had said, her voice trembling. "The building knows her. She knows the building. She'll find her way." It sounded less like a plan and more like a desperate hope whispered into the wind. Clara was a study in muted tortoiseshell, swirls of charcoal, amber, and cream, like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. Her fur, once probably plush, now looked a little thin in places, a little dusty. But it was her eyes that held you. Large, round, the color of old pennies, they held an unnerving depth. They weren't fearful exactly, not hostile. They were watchful, ancient, as if they'd seen the rise and fall of empires, the comings and goings of countless humans in this very apartment, and had long ago decided reserve was the only sensible policy. Her left ear bore a small, neat notch near the tip, a silent testament to battles fought and won in some long-forgotten alley. She moved with a deliberate slowness, each step considered, each placement of her paw deliberate. She didn't seek affection. She didn't rub against legs or purr for treats. She existed in the apartment like a quiet, self-contained shadow, observing Maya's clumsy attempts to navigate her own grief and the unfamiliar rhythms of city life. She'd find a patch of sun on the faded rug and sleep, a compact, dusty loaf. Or she'd sit perfectly still on the windowsill, her unblinking gaze fixed on the pigeons strutting on the fire escape across the alley, a statue carved from patience and indifference. Maya had tried. Oh, she tried. Expensive, smelly wet food in fancy little tins promising succulent salmon sensations. Crunchy kibble shaped like tiny fish. A fluffy bed placed strategically near the radiator. A feathery toy dangling enticingly. Clara regarded these offerings with the same detached curiosity she might afford a fallen leaf blowing across the floor. She'd sniff, sometimes. Occasionally, she'd deign to eat a few bites of the wet food, always leaving precisely half. The kibble remained largely untouched. The bed was ignored in favor of the worn spot on the rug near the bookshelf. The toy gathered dust. It felt like failure. Another thing Maya couldn't get right. Couldn't fix. Ben would have known what to do. Ben had always had a way with strays, with the broken, the lost. He'd have charmed Clara within a day, Maya was sure. The thought brought the familiar sting, sharp and fresh. She missed his easy laugh, his stupid jokes, the way he could make even the most awkward creature feel seen. Without him, the world felt muted, colors washed out, sounds distant. And this silent, ancient cat, this living relic of a life she hadn't known, felt like just another reminder of her own inability to connect, to heal, to move through the wet cement. The days blurred into a monochrome routine. Work, remote, thankfully, staring at a screen that felt miles away, the clank of the radiator, the sigh of the city outside, and Clara's quiet presence. Maya talked to her sometimes, filling the silence with mundane updates. Cold out there, huh, Clara? Or, that email was ridiculous. Clara never responded, never even flicked an ear. She just watched with those old penny eyes. Maya wondered what Clara saw. A sad woman rattling around in a space too big for her loneliness? An intruder in her established kingdom? Or just another transient human, destined to leave like all the others before? Then, 3 days ago, the change. Maya had placed the small blue ceramic bowl, Clara's bowl, a chipped relic from Mrs. Gable's time, on the kitchen floor as usual. She'd opened a new can, the pungent smell of tuna filling the small space. She'd spooned it out, the glistening pinkish mound looking unappetizing even to her. She'd called softly, "Clara? Dinner." Clara had appeared in the doorway, as was her custom. She'd padded slowly across the linoleum, her claws clicking softly. She'd stopped a foot from the bowl. She'd lowered her head. Sniffed. Not the usual cursory sniff. A deep, deliberate inhalation. Then, slowly, she'd lifted her head. Her eyes, those fathomless copper discs, had locked onto Maya's. Not accusing, not pleading, just looking, deeply, intently, as if trying to convey something vital, something beyond the capacity of meows or purrs. Then, without a sound, she turned and walked back into the living room, settling back onto her rug with her back to the kitchen. Maya had been puzzled. Maybe she didn't like this brand? She tried a different one the next day, chicken pate. Same ritual. The approach. The deep sniff. The long, silent look. The retreat. The food sat untouched, congealing under the fluorescent light. Today, the third day, Maya opened a can of the expensive salmon, the one Clara had occasionally nibbled at before. She placed the bowl down. "Clara?" Her voice sounded thin, brittle, even to her own ears. The silence stretched. Then the soft pad of feet. Clara entered the kitchen, her movements even more deliberate than usual. She paused at the bowl, lowered her head, sniffed. Not once, twice, 3 times. Her nose twitched minutely. Then she lifted her head. Again, those eyes found Maya's. Maya felt a prickle of unease crawl up her spine. There was something in that look, a quiet insistence. A silent plea, not for food, for something else entirely. Clara didn't walk away this time. She simply sat down, right there on the cold linoleum, a foot from the untouched salmon. She sat perfectly still, her tail curled neatly around her paws, her gaze unwavering, fixed on Maya. The hiss of the radiator seemed louder suddenly. The cold pressing against the windows felt more intense. The silence wasn't just empty, it was charged, heavy, expectant. Maya stared back at the small, dusty cat sitting resolutely beside the bowl of expensive, uneaten salmon. The question wasn't why she stopped eating. It was why she stayed. Why she looked at Maya like that. Like she was waiting. Like Maya held the answer to a question Clara couldn't ask. A shiver, unrelated to the January cold, traced its way down Maya's spine. The comfortable, predictable rhythm of shared loneliness was gone, replaced by this. A silent, watchful cat refusing food, radiating an unnerving, ancient patience. And a bowl sitting between them, holding not just congealing fish, but the first tremor of something shifting deep beneath the frozen surface of Maya's grief. Something important, fragile, and utterly unknown was beginning. The silence after Clara's refusal wasn't empty, it hummed. It vibrated in the space between Maya's ribs, a low thrum beneath the radiator's metallic sighs and the distant, mournful wail of a city bus grinding through slush. Maya stared at the cat. Clara stared back. The expensive salmon in the chipped blue bowl glistened, untouched, a monument to Maya's mounting confusion and a strange, prickling sense of inadequacy that felt disturbingly familiar. Okay, Maya breathed, the word barely a puff of condensation in the cold kitchen air. She knelt, slowly, her jeans protesting against the chilly linoleum. She wasn't sure what she was doing. Bargaining? Pleading? Investigating? Her hand hovered near the bowl, then retreated. She didn't dare touch it as if it were radioactive, the source of this sudden, baffling standoff. What's wrong with it, Clara? It's the good stuff. The salmon you liked, sometimes. Clara didn't blink. Her copper eyes held Maya's gaze with unnerving steadiness. It wasn't hostility, Maya realized. It was communication. A silent, intense transmission Maya couldn't decode. The cat's stillness was profound. She wasn't tense, not like a cat ready to bolt. She was anchored, present, waiting. Maya scooped the rejected salmon back into the can, the smell suddenly cloying. She washed the blue bowl meticulously under scalding water, scrubbing away any lingering phantom scent that might have offended the feline oracle. She tried a different bowl, a plain white cereal dish. She opened a brand new chicken this time, pristine and untainted. She placed it carefully on the floor. Clara watched the entire ritual, her head tilted slightly, an inscrutable judge observing a novice priestess perform unfamiliar rites. When the new offering was presented, she repeated the exact sequence. Approach, deep sniff, 3 precise inhalations this time, unwavering eye contact, then a slow, deliberate turn. She walked not to her rug, but to the radiator in the living room, settling onto the floorboards beside its warmth, her back a silent, furry dismissal. Maya slumped against the kitchen cabinets, the cold seeping through her sweater. Failure, cold and sharp, pressed down on her. Ben wouldn't be stumped by this. Ben would have laughed, crouched down, maybe offered a tiny piece of cheese from his palm, talking nonsense in that low, soothing rumble of his. He'd have won Clara over with sheer, uncomplicated kindness. Maya felt the absence of him like a physical ache, a hollow space where his warmth and easy confidence should have been. Without him, navigating even this small domestic mystery felt like traversing a minefield blindfolded. Grief wasn't just sadness, it was a thief of competence, a fog that dulled instincts. Later that evening, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of dust and old wool, Maya sat on the sofa, staring unseeingly at a flickering documentary on her laptop. The apartment felt cavernous, echoing with the ghosts of plans they'd made: the trip to Iceland, the idea of converting the garage into a studio, the vague, comforting dream of children whose faces were now blurred and lost. The weight of all those unmade futures pressed down, a suffocating blanket. A small, choked sound escaped her, not quite a sob, more a gasp against the pressure. From her spot by the radiator, Clara lifted her head, not with alarm, but with a slow, deliberate turn. Her penny eyes fixed on Maya. Not staring through her, as she often seemed to do, but at her. At the raw, exposed edge of her grief. Clara didn't move closer. She didn't purr. She simply witnessed. Her gaze was steady, ancient, holding Maya's fractured expression without flinching. It wasn't pity. It felt more like recognition, an acknowledgement of pain from one who had undoubtedly seen her share. It was the first time Maya felt truly seen in that apartment. Not by a colleague on a video call, not by a well-meaning but distant friend checking in, but by another living being sharing the space. The sheer, unexpected intimacy of it startled her. Tears, hot and sudden, welled up, blurring the laptop screen. She didn't wipe them away. She let them fall, silent and scalding, into the worn fleece of the blanket. Clara watched. Just watched. And in that silent vigil, something infinitesimal shifted. The crushing loneliness eased, just a fraction, replaced by a fragile, bewildering sense of companionship in the desolation. The next morning, Maya woke to the weak, gray January light filtering through the frosted window pane. The apartment was silent except for the radiator's familiar clank. And something else. A soft, rhythmic sound. Barely there. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Maya held her breath, listening. It came from the living room. She crept out of bed, padding silently across the cold floorboards in her socks. Clara was by the large bookcase, the one still half filled with Ben's things, his history books, his collection of vintage sci-fi paperbacks, a few framed photos Maya hadn't been able to box away yet. Clara wasn't looking at the books. Her attention was fixed low, near the baseboard. Her front paw, claws carefully sheathed, was gently, methodically, pawing at the worn carpet. Scritch, scritch. It wasn't frantic digging. It was exploratory, deliberate, like she was testing the texture, searching for something beneath the surface. Clara? Maya whispered. The pawing stopped instantly. Clara looked up, her expression unreadable. She blinked slowly once, a languid lowering and raising of her eyelids that seemed strangely deliberate. Then, with unhurried grace, she walked away towards the kitchen, as if her brief excavation had been merely a morning stretch. Maya knelt where Clara had been. The carpet was thin, worn nearly bare in patches. She ran her fingers over the spot. Nothing felt loose. No hidden trapdoor. Just old carpet and solid floorboard beneath. Yet the image lingered, the ancient cat, pawing with quiet intensity at the foundation of the room. Later, while attempting to work, Maya found her gaze constantly drawn to the window where Clara perched. The cat wasn't watching the pigeons today. Her gaze was fixed downward, into the narrow alley below. Maya followed her line of sight. Nothing moved but a discarded plastic bag caught on a fire escape, flapping like a trapped ghost. But Clara watched, her body still, her tail tip twitching just once. A minute flicker of what? Anticipation? Memory? Maya remembered Mrs. Gable's tearful explanation. She knows the building. What did that mean? What memories were etched into Clara's old bones, tied to these walls, these windows, this view of brick and iron? Maya started paying closer attention to Clara's routines, her silent language. She noticed how Clara always approached her water bowl from the left side, never the right. How she would spend exactly 20 minutes in the patch of weak afternoon sun that fell across the armchair before moving to the radiator. How she would pause every single time before entering the bedroom doorway, as if waiting for an invisible signal. These weren't just habits. They felt like rituals, ingrained pathways through the landscape of the apartment. One bitterly cold afternoon, the wind howling like a banshee around the building corners, Maya sat on the floor near the radiator, sorting through a box of old photos she'd brought from the suburbs. Pictures of Ben hiking, Ben laughing, Ben holding a tiny, terrified kitten they'd rescued one rainy spring. It had only stayed a week before finding a better home. Ben had joked, his eyes sad. The ache was a physical throb. She traced the curve of his smile in a faded snapshot, the paper cool beneath her fingertips. A tear splashed onto the plastic sleeve. A soft pressure against her thigh. Maya startled. Clara had approached silently. Not asking for food, not demanding attention. She simply leaned her thin, warm flank against Maya's leg. Not purring, just leaning. Offering the solid, quiet weight of her presence against Maya's trembling. The simple contact was electric. Maya froze, afraid to move, afraid to shatter this unprecedented moment. She could feel the slight vibration of Clara's breath, the thinness of her fur over delicate bones, the surprising warmth radiating from her small body. It wasn't affection, not in the way a puppy might shower it. It felt supportive, steadying, an anchor offered in a moment of emotional freefall. "Hey," Maya whispered, her voice thick. She didn't reach to pet her. She just let the contact exist, a silent bridge across species and sorrow. Clara stayed like that for long minutes, a warm, breathing weight against her leg, while Maya cried silently over the photos. The radiator hissed. The wind screamed outside. Inside, a small, dusty cat offered a silent, profound kind of solace simply by bearing witness and sharing warmth. That night, the mystery of the untouched food persisted. Maya tried plain boiled chicken, shredded by hand. She tried a different corner of the kitchen. She tried leaving the room entirely. The result was always the same. The approach, the deep sniff, the long, silent look, the retreat. But now, the look felt different. Less like an accusation about the food, and more like a shared secret. A silent communication Maya still couldn't grasp. Clara wasn't starving. She'd nibble at the kibble Maya left out as a backup, though less enthusiastically than before. It was the ritual of the meal, the blue bowl, that she rejected. It was specific, targeted. Maya found herself talking to Clara more. Not just observations about the weather, but fragments of her own thoughts, whispered into the quiet apartment. "I miss his stupid laugh," she'd say, washing dishes. Clara might be on the windowsill, but her ear would twitch, a subtle acknowledgement. That client was impossible today, Maya would sigh, flopping onto the sofa. Clara on her rug would slowly blink, a languid, deliberate closing and opening of her eyes that felt like a silent, "I hear you." She started noticing the details of Clara's world. The way dust motes danced in the weak sunbeams she sought. The faint, almost milky scent of her fur mixed with the dusty aroma of old books and heating pipes. The soft, almost inaudible clicking sound her jaw made sometimes when she was deeply relaxed. The texture of her fur under Maya's hesitant fingertips, surprisingly soft beneath the slightly dusty topcoat, thin in places over her spine, revealing the delicate architecture of her aging body. She learned the map of Clara's small scars, the notch in her ear, a tiny nick on her nose, a barely there ridge along one front leg. Each one a story untold, a battle survived in the concrete jungle below. One evening, drained from a day of wrestling with spreadsheets and the ever-present undercurrent of grief, Maya sank into the armchair, a book unopened in her lap. She stared into the middle distance, the apartment fading into a blur of shadows and the orange glow of a street lamp reflecting on the ceiling. The numbness was back, that heavy, wet cement feeling. Moving felt impossible. Thinking felt exhausting. She just existed, adrift in the quiet sea of her own loss. She didn't hear Clara approach. She only felt it. A slight dip in the cushion near her hip. Maya slowly turned her head. Clara had jumped onto the armchair, a first. Not onto Maya's lap, but onto the space beside her, curling herself into a compact, dusty circle. She didn't look at Maya. She faced forward, her profile regal against the dim light, her breathing a soft, steady rhythm. She closed her eyes. Not asleep, Maya sensed, but resting. Keeping watch. Sharing the space, sharing the quiet burden of simply being. Maya didn't move. She barely breathed. The warmth radiating from the small body beside her seeped through the fabric of her sweatpants, a tiny point of heat against the pervasive emotional chill. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It wasn't purring or headbutting. It was the profound simplicity of presence. Clara, the reserved, ancient, food-refusing queen of the apartment, had chosen to sit with her. Not for food, not for warmth from the radiator, but seemingly just to be near. In that quiet, shared space, with the city's distant hum and the radiator's familiar clank, the wet cement around Maya's feet felt just a fraction less thick. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the soft sound of an old cat breathing beside her, a fragile, unexpected bridge built not on words, but on shared stillness and the slow, tentative pulse of a connection neither had sought, but both, perhaps, desperately needed. The question of the bowl still hung heavy in the air, a mystery unresolved, but for the first time since Ben, Maya felt a flicker of something other than grief or confusion. A fragile, bewildering sense of not being entirely alone in the echoing space of her own heart. The fragile warmth of Clara's presence on the armchair lingered like a ghost of comfort long after the cat had stretched, yawned, revealing surprisingly sharp little teeth in her dusty mouth, and retreated to her radiator-side vigil. Maya had sat frozen, afraid to shatter the moment, until the chill of the apartment finally seeped through her sweatpants, urging her to move. The shared stillness had been a balm, a momentary suspension of the weight. But the mystery of the blue bowl remained, a persistent counterpoint to the tentative connection. The next morning, the ritual repeated with depressing predictability. Fresh chicken, meticulously shredded, presented in the washed blue bowl. Clara's approach, sniff, silent stare, retreat. Maya was becoming convinced it was communication. It held a quiet insistence, a patient waiting, as if Clara were a teacher waiting for a slow student to grasp a fundamental concept. It wasn't about the food in the bowl, Maya felt sure. It was about the bowl itself, or where it was placed, or something else entirely, something invisible to her human senses. Frustration warred with a deepening curiosity. Maya tried moving the bowl. First to the very spot Clara had pawed near the bookcase. The cat approached, sniffed the carpet where the bowl hadn't been, then sniffed the bowl itself. The stare intensified, longer this time, tinged with what Maya could only interpret as feline exasperation. Not here either. She moved it to the doorway of the bedroom. Same result. To the windowsill. Clara didn't even bother approaching that time. She just watched from her rug, her expression unreadable but distinctly unimpressed. It was during a particularly bleak afternoon, the sky the color of old lead, that Maya noticed something new. She was attempting to work, the glow of her laptop screen harsh in the dim apartment. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Clara wasn't sleeping. She was standing near the large floor-to-ceiling bookcase, the one housing Ben's history books, his dog-eared Vonnegut collection, the framed photo of them laughing on a windswept beach. But she wasn't looking at the books. Her attention was fixed low, near the baseboard, just to the right of where she'd pawed days earlier. Her body was tense, coiled with a quiet intensity Maya hadn't seen before. Her tail twitched, just the very tip, a metronome of focused energy. Her head was lowered, ears pricked forward, whiskers bristling. She wasn't pawing. She was listening. Or smelling. Or both. Utterly absorbed. Maya held her breath, watching. Minutes ticked by, marked only by the radiator's irregular clunks and Clara's absolute stillness. Then, with deliberate slowness, Clara extended her right front paw. Not to scratch or dig, but to press her soft, pink pads firmly against the worn carpet where it met the wooden baseboard. She held it there, pressing down, her eyes narrowed in concentration. A low, almost inaudible rumble vibrated in her chest. Not a purr, but a sound of deep focus, like the hum of machinery working hard. Scritch. It was faint. Maya might have missed it if the apartment hadn't been so quiet. It wasn't Clara making the sound. It came from behind the baseboard. Clara's head snapped up, her eyes wide, pupils dilated into dark pools. She stared intently at the spot where her paw had been. Then, slowly, deliberately, she lowered her head again, pressing her ear flat against the carpet right at the juncture with the wood. She stayed like that, a furry sphinx listening to secrets whispered by the foundations of the building. A chill, colder than the January air outside, prickled Maya's skin. What was back there? Pipes? Mice? Something else? The building was old. Mrs. Gable had lived here for decades. Clara had been here longer than Maya. What secrets did these walls hold? The thought wasn't frightening, exactly, but deeply unsettling. It was a crack in the mundane reality of her grief-stricken existence, a whisper of something hidden, something known to Clara but invisible to her. Later that evening, the scratching came again. Maya was washing dishes, the rhythmic clink of ceramic the only sound. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It was fainter than before, muffled, but undeniably there. It seemed to originate precisely from the spot Clara had been fixated on. Maya froze, dishcloth in hand. Clara, who had been dozing on the rug, was instantly alert. She didn't rush over. She lifted her head, ears swiveling like radar dishes, pinpointing the source. Her gaze locked onto the baseboard. She didn't hiss. She didn't growl. She just watched, her ancient eyes unblinking, radiating a watchful stillness that felt more unnerving than any aggressive display. Maya approached cautiously, kneeling near the bookcase. She pressed her own ear to the carpet where Clara had listened. The cold of the floorboards seeped into her cheek. She strained to hear. Silence. Thick, heavy silence. Then a faint, almost imperceptible scrape, like something very small dragging across wood. Or plaster. Could be a mouse. It should be a mouse. Old buildings had mice. That was logical. But the way Clara reacted, the intensity of her focus, it felt like more than vermin. It felt personal. Is there something back there, Clara? Maya whispered, running her fingers over the worn carpet seam. The material felt thin, brittle. Beneath it, the baseboard seemed slightly uneven. Not warped, but perhaps not as flush with the wall as it should be? Or was she imagining it, influenced by the cat's strange behavior? Clara blinked slowly at her, then deliberately turned her head away, resuming her watchful posture towards the sound. A dismissal. Figure it out. The scratching became a sporadic soundtrack to their days. Sometimes silent for hours, sometimes erupting in brief, frantic bursts, usually in the quiet lulls, late at night, early in the gray dawn. Clara's vigilance became a constant. She spent less time sleeping in her radiator spot and more time positioned near the bookcase, a silent sentinel. She'd often sit facing the baseboard, but her head would be turned, her gaze fixed on Maya with that same unnerving, expectant stare she reserved for the rejected food bowl. The message felt clear. This is connected. Pay attention. Maya found herself drawn to the spot too. While Clara watched, Maya would kneel, running her fingers over the baseboard, pressing gently. She tapped it lightly. Solid. She tried to peer into the tiny crack between the baseboard and the wall. Darkness. She unearthed a flashlight from a moving box, its beam weak and yellow. Shining it into the gap revealed only dusty floorboards and the rough backside of the baseboard. Frustration mounted. What was she supposed to do? Rip the baseboard off? The thought was absurd. Yet, Clara's unwavering focus made it feel necessary. One afternoon, overwhelmed by the mounting tension, the silent cat, the phantom scratching, the persistent ache of Ben's absence, Maya snapped. It wasn't loud. It was quiet, internal, a dam breaking under pressure. She sank onto the floor beside the bookcase, her back against the shelves housing Ben's books. She pulled her knees to her chest, resting her forehead on them. The tears came, hot and silent this time, a slow leak rather than a sob. She was tired. So tired. Tired of the grief, tired of the loneliness, tired of the confusing ancient cat and her inscrutable demands, tired of the scratching in the walls that echoed the scratching emptiness inside her. A soft thump. Warmth pressed against her side. She hadn't jumped onto her lap, but she'd settled right beside her, her thin flank pressed firmly against Maya's hip and thigh. Not purring. Just present. Solid. Grounding. Her head wasn't turned towards the baseboard now. It was turned towards Maya, her old penny eyes watching the tears track silently down her cheeks. There was no judgment in that gaze. Only a deep, fathomless witnessing. And something else, a shared weight. As if Clara understood the burden of the unknown, the frustration of secrets held just out of reach. Her steady warmth seeped through Maya's sweater, a small anchor in the storm of her emotions. Maya reached out a trembling hand, not to pet Clara's head, but to rest it gently on the cat's bony shoulder. She felt the delicate structure beneath the fur, the faint thrum of life. Clara didn't pull away. She leaned infinitesimally into the touch. It wasn't affection, not exactly. It was solidarity, a silent pact between two creatures bound by circumstance, one mourning a lost love, the other guarding a hidden truth, both adrift in the echoing apartment. "I don't know what you want me to do," Maya whispered, her voice raw. I don't know what's back there. Clara blinked slowly. Deliberately. Her gaze flickered towards the baseboard for a fraction of a second, then back to Maya's face. Listen. Understand. The scratching started again, louder now, more insistent. Scritch, scritch, scrape. It sounded closer, frantic. Clara's body tensed against Maya's leg, her focus snapping back to the wall. Her ears lay flat for a second, a ripple of tension through her small frame. Then she did something unexpected. Instead of staring intently, she lifted her head and looked directly at Maya. Her eyes were wide, pupils huge in the dim light. The low hum vibrated in her chest again, louder this time. It wasn't a growl of threat. It sounded like urgency. A plea. Do something now. The sound from behind the wall changed. The scratching stopped. A new sound replaced it, a tiny, frantic scrabbling. Like claws on smooth wood, slipping. A high-pitched, almost inaudible squeak of panic. Then silence. Abrupt, absolute silence. Clara remained frozen, staring at the baseboard, her body rigid. The hum stopped. The apartment plunged into a silence deeper than before, thick with dread and unanswered questions. The comfortable standoff was over. Something had happened behind that wall. Something final. The mystery of the blue bowl was now inextricably tangled with the silence emanating from the baseboard near Ben's books. The quiet shift Maya had felt weeks ago had become a seismic tremor, cracking open the fragile surface of her grief and revealing a darkness beneath she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Clara's expectant stare held no answers, only the terrible, unspoken weight of what might lie hidden, inches away, in the bones of the old building. The question hanging in the charged air wasn't just what was back there, but why Clara needed her to know. And what price might come with the knowing. The silence wasn't empty. It screamed. It screamed louder than the radiator's clank, louder than the wind buffeting the windows, louder even than the frantic, high-pitched scrabbling that had just been abruptly severed. It was a silence thick with finality, vibrating in the marrow of Maya's bones where she sat frozen on the floor, Clara's rigid body pressed against her leg. Maya couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The image of Ben's laughing face on the bookshelf above seemed to mock the suffocating dread pooling in the room. The frantic squeak echoed in her mind, a tiny life snuffed out behind a thin veneer of plaster and wood, inches from her knee. Clara remained statue still, her gaze laser-locked on the baseboard, ears flattened not in fear, Maya realized with a jolt, but in profound, focused listening. Waiting. The low hum had ceased, replaced by an electric tension radiating from the small cat. Seconds stretched into an eternity. The radiator gave a particularly violent clang, making Maya flinch. The sound shattered the paralysis. A sob, raw and ragged, tore from her throat. It wasn't just for the tiny, unseen creature that had likely just met its end. It was the cumulative weight, Ben's absence like a phantom limb, the oppressive loneliness of the city apartment, Clara's inscrutable grief and demands, and now this, death scratching at the walls of her fragile sanctuary. The dam broke. Tears streamed down her face, hot and unchecked, dripping onto her jeans, onto the dusty carpet beside Clara. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent, wrenching sobs. The grief wasn't a wave. It was a tsunami, pulling her under, drowning her in the sheer, unbearable wrongness of it all. Why was she here? Why was any of this happening? The world felt cruel, indifferent, a vast, cold machine grinding everything small and vulnerable into dust. Then what? Not just the ambient warmth from Clara's body, but movement. A soft, insistent pressure nudged her elbow. Maya lifted her tear-streaked face. Clara had shifted. She wasn't looking at the wall anymore. She was looking directly at Maya, her copper eyes wide, intense, reflecting the dim light like polished coins. That ancient gaze held no pity, no shared sorrow for the creature behind the wall. It held urgency, purpose, and something else, a fierce, protective determination Maya hadn't seen before. Clara nudged her elbow again, harder this time. Then, deliberately, she turned her head back towards the baseboard. Not just looking, pointing. With her nose. A sharp, unmistakable gesture. Then back to Maya. The message was blindingly clear, cutting through the fog of Maya's despair. Stop crying. Do something. Find it. It was the spark Maya needed. A focus for the chaotic storm inside her. Not for the dead thing, but for Clara. For this ancient cat who had witnessed her rawest grief, who had offered silent comfort, and who now demanded action with a clarity that brooked no argument. The helplessness curdled into a desperate resolve. Ben would have known what to do. He wouldn't have sat crying. He would have investigated. Swiping furiously at her tears, Maya pushed herself up. Her legs felt shaky, but a strange energy buzzed beneath her skin. She grabbed the weak flashlight from where it lay discarded days ago. Clara watched, unmoving, her gaze fixed on the baseboard as Maya knelt beside it again. The carpet felt gritty under her knees. The smell of dust and old wood filled her nostrils. She shone the feeble beam along the seam where the baseboard met the worn floorboards. Nothing. Just aged paint, grime, the faint outline of nail heads. She pressed her fingers against the wood, feeling for movement. Solid. She pushed harder, leaning her weight into it. Still solid. Frustration flared. What, Clara? What am I supposed to do? Tear it down? The words came out choked. Clara didn't react. Her unwavering stare remained fixed on a specific point, a section of baseboard about 18 inches long, directly beneath the lower shelf holding Ben's collection of World War II histories. Maya focused the light there. Was the paint slightly more worn? Was the seam infinitesimally wider? Or was it desperation making her see things? She ran her fingernail along the top edge of the baseboard. Caught. Not on the wall, but under the lip of the baseboard itself. She pressed harder, scraping her nail. A tiny sliver of paint flaked off. Beneath it, was it wood? Or something else? She pressed her eye close to the crack, the flashlight beam angled awkwardly. Darkness. But then, a glimpse of something smooth. Not rough plaster. Not wood grain. Something man-made? Her heart hammered against her ribs. She scrambled up, looking wildly around the cluttered apartment. Tools? Did she have tools? Ben had been the handy one. Her gaze landed on a box marked miscellaneous garage, shoved behind the sofa, remnants of her hasty move. She lunged for it, ripping the tape off, digging through tangled extension cords, rolls of tape, a half-empty can of WD-40, and there, at the bottom, wrapped in an old rag, was a small, flat pry bar. Ben's. The handle was worn smooth from his grip. Holding it felt like touching a ghost. Cold metal. Weighted with memory. She hesitated, looking back at Clara. The cat hadn't moved a muscle. Her gaze was still locked on that section of baseboard, radiating silent command. Do it. Maya took a shaky breath. She knelt again, positioning the flat end of the pry bar into the tiny gap where her nail had caught. She hesitated. This was vandalism. This was crazy. This was necessary. For Clara. for whatever truth lay hidden. She pushed down on the bar, gently at first. The wood groaned. Paint cracked. She pushed harder, leveraging her weight. A splintering sound, sharp in the silent apartment. A section of the baseboard, about a foot long, popped away from the wall with a dry, protesting crunch. Dust billowed out, thick and gray, smelling of age and neglect. Maya coughed, waving a hand in front of her face. Clara didn't flinch. She leaned forward slightly, her nose twitching, those ancient eyes fixed on the dark cavity revealed behind the broken wood. Maya shone the flashlight beam into the gap. It illuminated the rough lath and plaster of the wall, thick cobwebs glistening like spun sugar. And there, nestled against the back of the baseboard, lying on the dusty floorboards, was an object. Rectangular, covered in grime. Her hand trembled as she reached in. The space was tight, gritty plaster scraping her knuckles. Her fingers closed around cool, smooth edges. She pulled it out. It was a small, hinged wooden box. Simple, unadorned, the size of a thick paperback book. Dust coated its surface, ingrained in the grain. It felt strangely heavy in her hands. Maya stared at it, the pry bar forgotten on the floor beside her. This is what the frantic scratching had been about? This is what Clara had been guarding? What had been lost? She looked at Clara. The cat's intense focus had shifted from the wall to the box. She took a slow step closer, her nose almost touching the grimy wood. She sniffed deeply, a long, drawn-in breath. Then she looked up at Maya. Not with urgency now, with something else. A profound, weary sadness. And expectation. Open it. Maya's throat tightened. She wiped the thickest layer of dust off the box with her sleeve, revealing dark, worn wood beneath. Her thumb found the small, tarnished brass clasp. It was stiff, resistant. She pried it open with a fingernail. It clicked. Holding her breath, Maya lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in a bed of faded, brittle blue velvet, lay two things. The first was a photograph. Small, square, the edges white and slightly curled. It was black and white, faded with time. It showed a young woman, maybe in her 20s, with dark, wavy hair pinned up, wearing a floral dress with a fitted waist. She was smiling brightly, her eyes crinkled at the corners, holding a tiny, fluffy kitten against her cheek. The kitten was a pale blur of fur, impossibly small, its eyes barely open. Behind them, slightly blurred, was a window ledge. This window ledge. The same fire escape visible outside Maya's living room window. Mrs. Gable. Young, vibrant, full of life. And a kitten. The breath rushed out of Maya. She knew. She knew with absolute certainty. This was Clara, a tiny, vulnerable puff of fur, held with such evident love by a woman whose face Maya had only seen etched with the lines of age and sorrow. The second object lay beside the photo. It was a ceramic shard, about the size of a large coin, curved, glazed a familiar, deep cobalt blue on one side, white bisque on the other. Chipped, but unmistakable. It was a piece of a cat bowl. A piece of the blue bowl Maya had been using. Maya's gaze snapped to the kitchen, to the chipped blue bowl sitting clean and empty by the sink. Then back to the shard in the box. The pattern, the curve. It was a perfect match. A missing piece. Understanding crashed over her, cold and clear, washing away the confusion, the frustration, the grief for a moment, leaving only stunned revelation. Clara hadn't been refusing the food. She'd been refusing the bowl. Not because it was dirty, or the wrong shape, or in the wrong place. but because it was broken, incomplete, a painful, daily reminder of something lost, something cherished that had shattered, just like Mrs. Gable's life when she had to leave, just like Maya's life when Ben died. The frantic scratching, it hadn't been vermin trying to get in. It had been Clara weeks ago, maybe months ago, reacting to the scent of her past, of her lost life, trapped behind the wall, trying to reach the box containing the fragment of her old world, the photo of her and her young human, and the broken piece of the bowl that represented their shared history. The bowl Mrs. Gable must have used for her every single day. The bowl that had been whole, once, symbolizing a complete life. The creature behind the wall, had it been drawn by the scent of the box? Had it accidentally dislodged it? Had Clara's pawing finally shifted it into reach? And had its frantic attempts to escape or claim it ended in its demise? A tragic, small casualty in the unraveling of this decades-old secret. Maya looked down at the ancient cat sitting quietly beside her. Clara was no longer staring at the box. She was looking at Maya. Her old penny eyes held a depth of sorrow Maya could scarcely comprehend. Sorrow for the lost human? For the lost piece of her bowl? For the life left behind? It was all there, layered in her gaze. But there was also relief. A profound, weary release. The secret was out. The lost thing was found. Tears welled up again, but they were different this time. Not the hot tears of helpless grief, but the cooler, quieter tears of shared understanding. Of empathy so deep it resonated in her bones. She reached out not to touch the box, but to gently rest her hand on Clara's head, between her ears. The fur was thin, the skull delicate beneath her fingers. Clara didn't purr. She didn't lean in. But she didn't pull away. She closed her eyes. Slowly, deliberately, a silent acceptance. A weary acknowledgement of the bond forged not through affection, but through shared loss, through the unearthing of hidden pain, through the simple, devastating act of seeing each other's broken pieces. The radiator clanked. The wind moaned outside. Maya sat on the dusty floor, the splintered baseboard gaping beside her, the small wooden box cradled in her lap, the ghost of a young woman's smile beaming up from a faded photograph, and an ancient, broken-pawed cat finally resting beside her. The mystery of the blue bowl was solved. The frantic scratching had ceased. In the echoing silence of the apartment, heavy with dust and decades of memory, a profound, bittersweet understanding settled over them both. The wall had been breached. The past had been retrieved. And in its place, laid bare between them, was the raw, undeniable truth of what it meant to lose, to remember, and to carry on, bearing the weight of what was broken. The dust motes swirled in the weak afternoon light like miniature galaxies, settling slowly onto the splintered baseboard, the discarded pry bar, and the small wooden box resting on Maya's lap. The frantic energy, the desperate scratching, the suffocating silence, it had all dissolved, replaced by a profound, echoing stillness. Clara sat beside her, a warm, bony weight against her thigh, her eyes closed, breathing the slow, deep breaths of utter exhaustion. Or perhaps Maya thought of release. Maya didn't move. She traced the chipped edge of the blue ceramic shard with her thumb, the cool, smooth glaze contrasting with the rough break. The missing piece. The fragment of a whole world. She looked at the photograph again. Young Mrs. Gable's radiant smile, the impossibly tiny puff of fur that was Clara, pressed against her cheek. The love in that captured moment was almost painful in its intensity, a stark contrast to the quiet sorrow etched on the face of the woman Maya had met months ago, burdened by age and the impossible choice to leave her ancient companion behind. Clara hadn't just lost a home, she'd lost the embodiment of that love, the keeper of her history. The blue bowl, chipped and incomplete, had become a daily, agonizing symbol of that fracture. Clara shifted slightly, a soft sigh escaping her. Her eyes opened, those old penny discs focusing slowly on Maya, then drifting to the box. There was no demand in her gaze now. Only a deep, fathomless weariness, and something else, a quiet acceptance. The secret was known. The lost thing was found. The burden shared. Maya carefully closed the wooden box, the soft click of the clasp sounding final in the quiet apartment. She set it gently aside on the floorboards. The pry bar lay nearby, a cold, brutal intrusion in the emotional space. Ben's tool. He'd have known how to fix the baseboard neatly, Maya thought, a fresh pang of his absence piercing the strange calm. He'd have sanded the splintered wood, filled the gaps, painted it to match. But Ben wasn't here. She was. The immediate, practical question pressed in. The gaping hole in the wall. The dust. The broken baseboard lying askew. The radiator clanked, a grounding reminder of the present, of the cold January world outside these walls holding decades of silent grief. Maya took a slow breath. The frantic despair that had propelled her to pry the wood away was gone. In its place was a bone-deep fatigue, yes, but also a strange, fragile clarity. A purpose. She moved carefully, not wanting to disturb Clara. She gathered cleaning supplies, a dustpan, brush, a damp cloth. The plaster dust was fine and pervasive, coating everything within a 3-foot radius. She swept meticulously, wiped down the exposed lath, the rough edges of the broken baseboard. The physical act was grounding, methodical. Each swipe of the cloth, each gathering of gray powder, felt like clearing away not just debris, but layers of the mystery and the shared sorrow that had clung to them both. Clara watched her work, her head resting on her paws, her tail tip giving a single, slow flick. When Maya carefully lifted the broken section of baseboard to assess the damage, Clara didn't react. Her vigil over the spot seemed complete. Later, Maya sat at the small kitchen table, the wooden box and its contents before her. The chipped blue bowl sat beside them, clean and empty. She picked up the ceramic shard, holding it against the chip in the bowl's rim. It fit perfectly, like the last piece of a jigsaw puzzle revealing the whole picture. A complete circle. She rummaged in the miscellaneous garage box and found a small tube of superglue Ben had used for model airplanes. Her hands trembled slightly as she applied a tiny bead to the broken edges, carefully aligning the shard. She held it in place, her fingers pressed firmly against the cool ceramic, counting slow breaths. 1 minute. 2. The glue bonding, sealing the decades-old fracture. She set the repaired bowl gently on the table. It wasn't pristine. The crack was visible, a fine, hairline scar tracing the curve where the shard met the original piece. The glaze didn't quite match perfectly where the break was. It was undeniably mended, but the evidence of its breaking, its history, was permanently etched into its surface. It wasn't the bowl it once was. It was something new, something whole, yet marked. Maya filled it with fresh water, the clear liquid catching the overhead light. She placed it carefully on the kitchen floor, not in its usual spot, but near the doorway, a neutral space. She didn't call Clara. She simply waited. Clara appeared moments later, padding silently from the living room. She paused, her gaze sweeping the room, landing on the bowl. Her approach was slower than ever, each step deliberate. She stopped a foot away, lowered her head, sniffed. Not the deep, investigative sniffs of before. This was different. Lighter. More contemplative. Her nose twitched, tracing the air above the water, then dipping lower, near the rim, hovering over the visible seam of the repair. Maya held her breath. Clara lifted her head. Her copper eyes met Maya's. The ancient, watchful intensity was still there, but softened, tempered by something Maya could only interpret as recognition, acknowledgement. Clara lowered her head again, not retreating, but extending her neck. She took a delicate lap of the water. Then another. She drank for a long moment, the only sound the soft lap, lap in the quiet kitchen. When she finished, she sat back, licked her lips once, and looked at Maya again. A slow, deliberate blink. Then she turned and walked back towards the radiator, her movements carrying a new kind of ease, a subtle uncoiling of tension Maya hadn't fully realized was there until it was gone. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. Clara didn't suddenly become a lap cat. She didn't purr loudly or demand affection. Her routines remained largely intact. The patch of afternoon sun, the radiator vigil, the silent observation from the windowsill. But subtle shifts began to weave themselves into the fabric of their days. She started sleeping closer. Not on the armchair beside Maya, but on the rug near the sofa where Maya often sat working. Her chosen spot was just within reach, a quiet declaration of proximity without demand. Sometimes, in the evenings, when Maya read or simply stared into the middle distance, Clara would stretch, yawn widely, and resettle herself a few inches nearer, her body oriented towards Maya. A silent offering of shared space. She became more present during Maya's quiet moments of grief. No longer just a distant observer, but a closer companion in the stillness. If Maya sat on the floor, tears silently tracking down her face while holding one of Ben's shirts she hadn't been able to pack away, Clara might approach, not leaning against her, but sitting nearby, facing her, those old penny eyes holding her gaze with a quiet, unwavering steadiness that felt less like witnessing and more like anchoring. A silent reminder, I am here. You are not alone in this. Maya found herself talking to Clara more openly. Not just about the weather or work frustrations, but about Ben. Small memories. The stupid way he'd dance while making pancakes. The terrible impression he'd do of their grumpy neighbor. The way his hand felt, warm and sure, holding hers. The words didn't always come easily, sometimes catching in her throat, but she pushed them out into the quiet space Clara occupied. Clara would listen, her ears twitching slightly, her gaze attentive. Sometimes, she'd offer that slow blink, a silent punctuation mark. It wasn't conversation, but it was communion, a sharing of the load. The repaired blue bowl became Clara's water bowl exclusively. Maya tried putting food in it once, a small offering of the expensive salmon. Clara approached, sniffed the food, then looked pointedly at Maya, a flicker of the old, inscrutable expression returning. She didn't refuse it outright, but she left it mostly untouched. The message was clear. The bowl's purpose was restored, but it was a vessel for life-giving water now, a symbol of wholeness, not sustenance. Food belonged in a plain, white dish, placed respectfully away from the relic of the past. Maya understood. The bowl held too much history, too much weight, to be used casually. It was a monument, mended but sacred. Maya fixed the baseboard. Not with Ben's skill, but with determination. She glued the broken piece back as best she could, filling the gaps with putty she found in Ben's box, sanding it rough. She painted over it with leftover white paint from the landlord, the patch obvious and amateurish against the aged wood. It wasn't perfect, It would never be invisible. But it was closed. Secured. The hidden cavity was sealed again, the secret no longer screaming from the wall, but resting peacefully within the small wooden box Maya now kept on the bookshelf, beside the photo of Ben. 2 fragments of lost lives, acknowledged, remembered, integrated. Life settled into a new rhythm, quieter, softer than before. The sharp edges of Maya's grief hadn't vanished. They were still there, catching her unexpectedly when a certain song played or she smelled pine needles. Ben had loved real Christmas trees. But the crushing weight, the feeling of wading through wet cement, had lessened. The constant ache was now a familiar companion, not a suffocating enemy. She found she could breathe more deeply. She started noticing the city again, not just its grime and noise, but the way the setting sun painted the brick buildings gold, the unexpected kindness of the barista who remembered her order, the intricate patterns of frost on her windowpane. One crisp February morning, sunlight streamed through the now clear window, weak but bright, painting a long rectangle of warmth on the living room rug. Maya sat cross-legged within it, sorting mail. Clara was in her patch of sun, a compact, dusty loaf, her eyes closed, her sides rising and falling peacefully. The radiator hissed its familiar song. The repaired blue bowl sat near the kitchen doorway, holding clean water that caught the light, glinting off the hairline scar of its repair. Maya watched the cat. The deep lines of tension around Clara's eyes seemed softer in sleep. The ancient watchfulness was momentarily at rest. She looked, not young, never young, but at peace. Content in the warmth, in the quiet, in the simple fact of her bowl being whole again, even if marked. The frantic guardian of a lost secret had finally laid down her burden. Maya thought of the frantic scratching, the silent vigil, the box hidden for who knew how long. She thought of Mrs. Gable, young and vibrant, holding her tiny kitten. She thought of the impossible choice, the fracture. She thought of her own fracture, the world tilting when Ben died. She thought of the chipped bowl, rejected, a symbol neither of them fully understood until the wall came down. The mystery was solved. The tension resolved. Yet, peace wasn't about forgetting. It was about integration. The broken pieces weren't discarded. They were mended, held, incorporated into the whole. The scar on the bowl. The amateur patch on the baseboard. The ache in Maya's chest. The ancient sorrow in Clara's eyes. These weren't flaws to be hidden. They were testaments. Proof of survival. Proof of love lost, but also proof of the quiet, persistent act of carrying on. Clara stretched in her sleep, extending one thin front leg, her claws flexing briefly, catching the sunlight. She sighed, a soft, contented sound, and resettled herself. Maya smiled, a small, genuine thing that felt unfamiliar yet right on her face. The winter sun was weak, but its warmth on her skin was real. The radiator clanked. The city hummed outside. Inside the apartment on West Grace Street, amidst the mended objects and the quiet companionship forged in shared loss, life, marked but whole, continued. The question of why Clara stayed wasn't a mystery anymore. She stayed because this, with its broken pieces carefully glued back together, was finally, simply home. Spring arrived in Chicago not with a fanfare of blossoms, but with a slow, muddy thaw. The skeletal trees lining West Grace Street began to hint at buds, tiny fists clenched against the lingering chill. The grimy snow mountains shrank into gray, gritty puddles reflecting the still pale sky. Inside the third-floor apartment, the radiator's dominance waned, replaced by the tentative warmth of longer days filtering through the now clean windows. The air smelled less of dust and despair, more of damp wool drying and the faint, hopeful scent of the hyacinth bulb Maya had forced in a chipped mug on the windowsill. Life had settled into a rhythm woven with quiet understanding. The repaired blue bowl sat in its place of honor near the kitchen doorway, holding fresh water that caught the afternoon light, the hairline crack a visible testament to its history. Clara drank from it daily, her approach calm, her acceptance complete. She'd become a more tangible presence in the apartment's daily flow. She no longer perched solely as an observer, she was a participant in the quiet symphony of their shared existence. She'd follow Maya from room to room, not demanding attention, but simply accompanying. Her chosen sleeping spot was now permanently near the sofa, a dusty, sun-warmed island on the rug. She'd watch Maya work, her old penny eyes following the cursor on the screen or the movement of her hands knitting, a silent, steady presence. The frantic guardian of a lost secret had become a companion in the present. Maya found the sharpest edges of her grief softened, worn smooth by time and the unexpected balm of Clara's quiet solidarity. She still cried, sometimes unexpectedly, finding a forgotten note in Ben's handwriting tucked in a book, hearing a snippet of a song they'd danced to in their tiny kitchen. But the tears were different now. Less like drowning, more like rain washing over stone. Cleansing, somehow. Necessary. And Clara was always there. Not crowding, not fussing, but present. A warm weight nearby, a slow blink from across the room, a silent acknowledgement of the sadness without the need to fix it. It was a language they both understood, the language of enduring loss. One blustery April afternoon, the wind whipping new leaves against the glass, Maya found herself standing before the last unopened moving box. It sat in the corner of the bedroom, a cardboard monument to procrastination and pain. Marked simply Ben's desk, it held the detritus of his daily life: pens, notebooks, loose change, the small brass compass he'd carried hiking, the framed photo of his parents that had sat beside his monitor. The final barrier. She'd unpacked clothes, books, even his toolbox. But this felt like opening a tomb. These were the intimate, everyday things, still vibrating with the echo of his presence. Touching them felt like touching the ghost of his routines, his thoughts, his life. She'd avoided it for months, walking past it with averted eyes, the very sight of the taped flaps tightening her chest. But today, standing in the shaft of afternoon light cutting across the worn floorboards, the box didn't seem like a threat. Felt heavy, but inevitable. Like a door that needed to be opened, not because she was ready, but because it was time. She took a deep breath, the air catching slightly. She knelt, the floorboards cool beneath her knees. The packing tape protested as she peeled it back, the ripping sound loud in the quiet room. She lifted the flaps. The smell hit her first. Not musty, but familiar. The faint, clean scent of the wood polish he used on his desk, the dusty aroma of paper, a lingering trace of his aftershave clinging to a forgotten scarf bundled at the top. Tears pricked instantly at her eyes, but she blinked them back. She reached in, her hands trembling only slightly. First, the framed photo of his parents. She set it gently aside. Then, a jumble of pens, chewed ballpoints, fancy fountain pens he never used but loved, highlighters dried out. She sorted them into a small mug she'd brought in. Notebooks filled with his sprawling, energetic handwriting, meeting notes, project ideas, grocery lists, fragments of poems he'd never shown anyone. Each page a whisper of his mind. She stacked them carefully. Then, her fingers brushed against something smooth and cool, tucked beneath a pile of loose receipts. She pulled it out. It was a stone. Smooth, flat, oval-shaped, about the size of her palm. Gray, veined with white and flecks of shimmering mica. Lake Michigan granite. She recognized it instantly. It was the stone Ben had picked up on their last trip to the lakeshore, just weeks before. They'd walked for miles, the wind whipping their hair, the vast gray expanse of water stretching to the horizon. He'd stooped, picked it up, rubbed his thumb over its surface. "Feel that?" he'd said, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "Smooth, solid, been tumbled by the water for centuries. Just endures." He'd slipped it into his coat pocket. She hadn't thought about it since. Holding it now, the cool weight solid in her palm, felt like holding a piece of that day. She could almost feel the sting of the wind, hear the crash of the waves, see the way his eyes had crinkled against the cold light as he smiled at her, holding up the stone. The ache was deep, a resonant thrum in her chest, but it wasn't debilitating. It was poignant. A connection. She closed her fingers around the stone, its smoothness a comfort. She looked down at the box, now half emptied. The daunting monument had become just things. Precious things, painful things, but manageable things. She could sort them, keep some, let others go. The paralysis was gone. A soft thud sounded behind her. Clara had padded silently into the room. She sat in the doorway, her gaze fixed not on Maya, but on the stone held tightly in her hand. Her expression was unreadable as always, but there was a stillness in her posture, an attentiveness. Maya held the stone out slightly. "He found this," she said, her voice thick but steady. "By the lake. Said it endured." Clara didn't move closer. She blinked slowly. Then her gaze shifted to the repaired blue bowl visible through the doorway, sitting in its patch of sunlight near the kitchen. The water within it caught the light, glinting. The hairline crack was visible even from here. The connection struck Maya with the quiet force of revelation. Not a thunderclap, but a deep, resonant chime. The stone. Smooth, solid, shaped by relentless waves. Enduring. The bowl. Broken, mended, scarred. Holding water. Sustaining life. Enduring. Ben, taken by a wave of fate far too soon. His presence, like the stone, a solid weight in her memory, shaped by their time together. Clara, scarred by loss, her life fractured, yet still here. Still present. Still drinking from the mended bowl. Enduring. Herself, cracked open by grief. Slowly, painfully, gluing the pieces back together, not into what was before, but into something that could still hold life. Could still endure. Clara's gift wasn't just the revelation of the broken bowl or the hidden photograph. It wasn't just the silent companionship in grief. It was this, the visceral, wordless understanding of endurance. The lesson etched not in words, but in the very fiber of the ancient cat's being, in the visible scar on the ceramic, and now, reflected in the cool, smooth weight of Ben's stone in her hand. Endurance wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about being broken and finding a way to hold together anyway. It was about the quiet persistence of life, like water finding its level in a chipped vessel. It was about the love that remained, not as a sharp pain, but as a deep, sustaining current, like the lake that had shaped the stone. Maya looked from the stone to Clara. The cat held her gaze for a long moment, then slowly blinked again. A benediction, an acknowledgement. Then, with her usual unhurried grace, she turned and walked back towards her patch of afternoon sun in the living room. Maya remained kneeling, the stone cool and heavy in her palm. She looked around the bedroom, the sorted items from Ben's desk, the open box no longer a menacing presence, the sunlight strengthening as the clouds shifted outside. The apartment felt different. Lighter, yet more anchored. Filled not just with absence, but with presence. Her presence. Clara's presence. Ben's presence, carried now not as a crushing weight, but as the enduring stone in her pocket, the memory warm and solid. She finished unpacking the box. She placed his parents' photo on her own dresser. She put the pens in a drawer. She kept the notebooks, stacked neatly on a shelf. She kept the stone. She placed it on the windowsill beside the hyacinth, where the afternoon light could catch the flecks of mica. A small, solid piece of endurance, watching over the fragile, blooming purple flowers. Later that evening, as she washed the dishes, Clara came into the kitchen. She paused by her blue bowl, drank deeply, the soft lap of familiar rhythm. Maya watched her, the way the light caught the thin fur over her spine, the way her delicate shoulder blades moved beneath her skin as she drank. Ancient, scarred, enduring. Maya turned off the tap, dried her hands. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She simply walked over and sat on the floor near Clara, not touching her, just sharing the space. The radiator gave a final, sleepy clank before falling silent for the night. The city lights glowed beyond the window. The repaired bowl sat between them, holding water, holding light, holding the silent, profound truth Clara had finally helped her see, that even the most broken things, tended with care and acceptance, could become vessels for what endures. The final gift wasn't in the finding, but in the understanding of what it meant to be found, to be mended, and to simply, quietly, go on. Chicago summers arrive with a sigh of relief, a collective unclenching after the long Midwestern winter. On West Gray Street, the skeletal trees erupted into a dense canopy of green, filtering the harsh sunlight into dappled patterns on the sidewalks below. The air, thick with humidity and the scent of grilling meat from open windows, buzzed with the lazy drone of cicadas and distant traffic. Inside the third-floor apartment, the radiators slept, silent and cold. The windows stood open, sheer curtains breathing softly in the warm breeze, carrying the sounds of children playing in the alley and the rhythmic thump of a bass line from a passing car. The smell of dust was gone, replaced by the green scent of the thriving spider plant on the bookshelf and the faint, clean aroma of lemon polish Maya used on the old wood floors. Time had woven its quiet magic. The amateur patch on the baseboard near Ben's books had faded into the wall's history, just another character line on the face of the old building. The small wooden box sat on the bookshelf, not hidden, but integrated, beside the photo of Ben laughing on the beach, and now, beside the smooth gray stone from Lake Michigan, its flecks of mica catching the afternoon sun. The repaired blue bowl held its place of quiet dignity near the kitchen doorway, the water within it cool and clear, the hairline crack a familiar, almost comforting, signature. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt less like survival and more like living. A life marked, yes, but fundamentally whole. Maya worked at her laptop, the city's summer hum a backdrop to her concentration. She cooked simple meals, the sizzle of onions in a pan, a domestic music she'd once thought lost. She even met a neighbor, Sarah from down the hall, for coffee on the fire escape one sticky evening, the conversation easy, laced with laughter that didn't feel like a betrayal. The sharp, jagged edges of grief were still present. They always would be. A song, a smell, the particular slant of evening light could still bring a sudden, sharp ache, a catch in her breath. But the undertow had released its grip. She could breathe. She could move forward, carrying Ben's memory not as a crushing weight, but as the stone in her pocket, solid, enduring, a touchstone of love. Clara had become the gentle, dusty heartbeat of the apartment. Her movements were slower now, more deliberate, a testament to her 17 years. She spent long hours in the patch of sun that migrated across the living room floor, a compact loaf of charcoal, amber, and cream fur, rising and falling with deep, peaceful breaths. Her watchfulness had softened into a serene awareness. She no longer guarded secrets, she simply was. She still followed Maya from room to room, a silent, familiar shadow. She still offered her quiet presence during moments of sadness or reflection, sitting nearby, her old penny eyes holding a depth of understanding that felt ancient and kind. The frantic energy, the demanding stares, the silent battles were memories. She drank from her blue bowl with calm acceptance, the mended vessel holding the water that sustained her. One humid August afternoon, a soft knock echoed through the apartment. Maya, surprised, unannounced visitors were rare, opened the door to find Mrs. Gable. The bird-like woman seemed even smaller, frailer, leaning heavily on a walker, aided by a cheerful aide. But her eyes, though clouded by age, held a bright, nervous energy. "Maya, dear? I hope it's not an imposition." Mrs. Gable's voice was thin but clear. "I'm just down at Maple Grove for a checkup and I just felt a pull. To see the old place. To see her." Maya's heart squeezed. "Of course, Mrs. Gable. Please come in." The aide helped Mrs. Gable maneuver the walker over the threshold. She paused just inside, her gaze sweeping the familiar room, the windows, the bookcase, the worn rug. Her eyes lingered on the patched baseboard for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face, then moved on, searching. Clara, roused from her sun patch by the unfamiliar voices, had retreated to her radiator spot, observing cautiously. Then Mrs. Gable saw her. "Oh, Clara," she breathed, the name a sigh filled with decades of love and sorrow. Tears welled instantly in her eyes. "My sweet, stubborn old girl." Clara didn't rush forward. She didn't meow. She stood slowly, her movements stiff with age, and fixed her gaze on the woman in the doorway. Her copper eyes, usually so inscrutable, seemed to widen, to deepen. She took a step, then another, her tail held low but not tucked. She approached the walker slowly, deliberately, stopping a foot away. She lifted her head, sniffing the air, her nose twitching minutely. She looked directly into Mrs. Gable's tear-filled eyes. A low sound rumbled in Clara's chest. Not the urgent hum from before, but something softer, deeper. A purr. Faint, rusty from disuse, but unmistakable. A sound of profound recognition. Of homecoming. Mrs. Gable let out a soft sob, reaching out a trembling, blue-veined hand. She didn't try to pet Clara. She simply held her palm open, inches from the cat's nose. Clara leaned forward, ever so slightly, and pressed her forehead against the offered palm. She held it there, purring that fragile, ancient purr, her eyes closing. Maya watched, tears blurring her own vision. It was a moment outside of time. The young woman in the photograph holding the tiny kitten. The ancient woman touching the ancient cat. The love, the loss, the impossible separation bridged in a single, silent gesture. The fracture acknowledged, the bond enduring despite time and distance and broken bowls. Clara wasn't seeking the past, she was recognizing it, honoring it, and then letting it be. After a long minute, Clara stepped back. She looked at Mrs. Gable one more time, gave a slow, deliberate blink, a benediction. then turned and walked, stiffly but with purpose, back to her patch of sun. She curled up, tucked her nose under her tail, and closed her eyes. The purr subsided. The moment was complete. Mrs. Gable wiped her eyes with a tissue the aide handed her. "Thank you, Maya," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for taking care of her. For understanding her." Her gaze drifted again to the patched baseboard, then to the blue bowl near the kitchen. A faint, knowing smile touched her lips. She always was particular about that bowl. Maya simply nodded, words failing her. Mrs. Gable patted her hand. "She found her way. And so did you, dear. So did you." The visit was brief. As the aide helped Mrs. Gable back out into the hallway, Maya glanced at Clara. The old cat was asleep, her breathing deep and even, a picture of peace in the summer sun. The mended bowl sat nearby, holding water that reflected the light. The stone on the windowsill glinted. Ben smiled from his photograph. The meaning settled over Maya, quiet and profound as dust motes in a sunbeam. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic closures. It wasn't about forgetting or moving on as if the past never happened. It was about moving forward, carrying the broken pieces with tenderness, letting the scars become part of the story, not the end of it. Clara's refusal to eat hadn't been a rejection of Maya, but a silent scream about a deeper fracture, the loss of her world, symbolized by the chipped bowl. Her vigil by the wall wasn't madness, but loyalty to a hidden truth. Her eventual acceptance of the mended bowl wasn't just about water. It was an acceptance of a new kind of wholeness, one that acknowledged the break. She had taught Maya, through silent endurance and unwavering presence, that grief doesn't vanish, it transforms. It becomes the bedrock, not the tombstone. Love doesn't die, it endures, changing shape, finding new vessels, a mended bowl, a smooth stone, the quiet companionship of an ancient cat, the warmth of a shared memory. The frantic scratching in the walls, the mystery, the tears, the mending, it all pointed to this simple, universal truth. We are all vessels. We hold love, we hold loss, we hold memories. And sometimes we break. The measure isn't in staying pristine, it's in finding the courage, or receiving the quiet help, to gather the pieces and mend. Not to erase the cracks, but to make them strong enough to hold life again. To hold water. To endure. Clara lived through that fall, a serene, dusty monarch surveying her domain. She grew thinner, slept more, but her presence remained a constant, gentle warmth. Then, one crisp October morning, with the sunlight painting golden patterns on the floor, Maya found her. Curled not in her sunpatch, but on the rug near the sofa, right beside where Maya usually sat. Her body was still, finally at rest. Her old penny eyes were closed. Her face, in eternal sleep, held an expression of profound peace. She had simply stopped, her long journey of endurance complete. Maya knelt beside her, tears falling silently onto the worn carpet. Not tears of devastation, but of deep, bittersweet gratitude. She placed a hand on Clara's thin, cooling fur, feeling the delicate structure beneath. She thought of the tiny kitten in the photograph, the fierce guardian of the wall, the silent witness to her grief, the teacher of endurance. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking, "for staying, for showing me the way home." She buried Clara's ashes, mixed with seeds of hardy wildflowers, in a quiet corner of the community garden down the block. A place where life would return, season after season. The repaired blue bowl remained on the bookshelf, a quiet monument. Not a symbol of sadness, but of resilience. of love that endures beyond the vessel that once held it. Maya still lives in the apartment on West Gray Street. The city's rhythms flow outside her windows, winter's bite, spring's hesitant thaw, summer's vibrant hum, autumn's golden sigh. She lives a life rich with the texture of memory and the quiet pulse of the present. She still talks to Ben sometimes. She smiles more easily. She keeps Ben's stone in her pocket on hard days. And sometimes, when the light slants just right through the window, catching the hairline crack on the blue bowl, or when she feels the smooth weight of the stone, she thinks of Clara. Not with piercing sorrow, but with a deep, abiding warmth. A quiet acknowledgement of the invisible mending that holds us together, the enduring love that flows even through the cracks, and the profound truth whispered in the silence by an ancient, broken-pawed cat. We endure. This story carved its way from my heart to yours. If Maya and Clara's journey of invisible mending resonated with you, smash that bell icon to never miss tales of quiet resilience. Comment below, did the blue bowl's secret break you too? Leave a like if you believe love endures through every crack. Share this with someone who understands the weight of what's unspoken. Subscribe for more soul-stirring journeys, where everyday objects hold galaxies of meaning, where grief and grace intertwine like tree roots, where broken things teach us how to hold water. Your tap of the thumbs up isn't just applause. It's a beacon telling me, keep stitching these fragile truths into the dark. Until the next story finds its way home.